Good morning, everybody. My name's Colleen. I am a student at Universidad Panamericana. My student ID number is 201-804-265. And this is my final exam for the course Teaching Techniques for Listening and Speaking. So my plan is based on Dr. Seuss. My students love Dr. Seuss as of preschool on up, and even the older kids, they value the content and the expression that Dr. Seuss provides. So today's activity is called Dr. Seuss Said What? And the objectives are to determine elements of style in Dr. Seuss's text, identify key words and phrases that contribute to Dr. Seuss's overall text, and that includes all of the silly language that he uses. And of course, obviously, formally, that means figurative and connotative meanings. And then analyze the impact of a specific word choice on meaning and tone. Dr. Seuss's word choice are crucial to the development of his poetry. And then finally, they're going to design and recite a poem based on Dr. Seuss's style. Now, at my institution, this would be age 10 through 12, and the level would be intermediate, elementary 3rd through 5th grade. However, this is a very adaptable activity, and it can be carried up into much, much higher level. You could even work it into a Shakespeare kind of activity. So it kind of depends on the level that students are at and kind of the base that they have behind them. So now the lesson plan development. This was interesting. So my activity was based on my personal experience because I teach a listening skills class once a week to all levels 1 through 5 in elementary. And I wanted to include specific strategies that I had already implemented, but then also a lot of the strategies that were presented into the course content. Now, this activity would be implemented in a listening skills section with a library traditional classroom environment, and can be either one. Obviously, I would be incorporating speaking skills, and like I said, 3rd through 5th grade elementary. Now, some of the listening skills that I integrated were the 3 moments: before, while, and prior, or pre, during, and post listening. Intrinsic motivation by appealing to the learner's interests. They love Dr. Seuss, so they're definitely going to be interested. There's always that student that's not interested and that you got to really pull apart to get into the activity. But for the most part, Dr. Seuss is a hit. Considering the form of listeners' responses. Now, this is important because their speaking skills can vary, but it can also kind of make sure that they're conveying the proper message. And then obviously, which should be incorporated into every lesson if we can, is teaching students strategies on how to learn, like be independent learners. Now, the speaking skills integrated included strategic competence, which we need as young learners, we need as adults, making sure that there's a large range of context available and a very realistic context, a balance between accuracy and fluency. Now, this activity is going to be focused primarily on fluency. However, in their responses during class discussions, accuracy is important. However, it won't be the main focus. And obviously the ability to interact. Now, the course content drove the development of this activity, obviously, but it allowed me to focus on both skills, okay? Now, some of the difficulties, that just made me had to think a little bit more include intrinsic motivation, keeping those learners' interests in mind, and including the speaking strategy, because I tend to focus on listening skills. But they were overcome. Lots of research, focusing on my audience, and going through my class notes and the content from the course helped me out quite a bit. So again, Dr. Seuss said what? And in the introduction, and this is kind of my prep for listening, we're going to talk about the topic, some of the vocabulary, prior knowledge. We want to make sure that we inform students that they will be reviewing the author, Dr. Seuss. Show them a picture of Dr. Seuss. Make sure that they're aware of who he is. They need to add imagery to a name. And not only at this point of the activity, but throughout, you need to make sure that students understand the expectations of each activity so that they're aware, Then we're going to move on to prior knowledge before listening, and this includes, Some key principles mentioned in the course content to design listening comprehension activities. And at this point, it means the before listening activity. Now, ask them if they're familiar with Dr. Seuss's work. Which ones? Do they have a favorite? This kind of moves along with intrinsic motivation. Then as a class, orally brainstorm words that they remember from his work that are silly or that they don't understand if they were independent. There's a lot of vocabulary within Dr. Seuss's texts that within the context makes great sense, but if you were just going to read that word independently, it's a made-up word. It's not real. You're not going to understand it. Now, some of the listening strategies that I included in this part of the activity were including authentic context, ensuring the listener's comprehension through the student's response in speech. That response in speech is critical to ensuring comprehension. Then while listening, again, post second phase of the listening process, I'm going to start with reading the text out loud to the students and allowing them to follow the reading visually. Make sure that that imagery complements what they're hearing. And it also helps them to read along. Okay? Now the first task is that I want them to identify the words that rhyme, including those with whose final sounds spelling aren't the same. So this is really important. I often encourage my students to close their eyes and I'll reread a certain verse of a poem and I'll ask them to identify the words that rhyme. Because a lot of times they have trouble if their spelling isn't similar and their brain is telling them it's not spelled the same, but it kind of sounds the same. So a lot of times that encourages them and it helps them out to identify rhyming words. Strategy, of course, there is looking for keywords. Now then we want to reread the text out loud to students for a second time. And they're going to identify the tone of the various verses. Now, if you look at the Cat in the Hat, at the beginning, the kids are curious. They want to get to know the Cat in the Hat. And they think, ooh, who is this? Then as he starts getting into trouble, they start kind of, becoming shocked and surprised. And then towards the end, cool, calm, the cat, he keeps things in tone. And so kids start to feel a little bit more confident. Now, in the third task, you want to reread the text again to the students and ask them to determine the unreal words that are in the text and their figurative meaning understood through the context. Now, this is a little bit more analysis. They really have to understand context in order to obtain this. Now, listening strategies in this part of the activity include guessing meanings and speaking clarification. Now, as you can tell, one of the listening techniques that I'm using is the top-down technique. I'm evoking a lot from prior knowledge and background info because these kids have a lot of exposure to Dr. Seuss and these kind of skills in lower elementary. So I want to make sure that I take advantage of that. Okay. Now, post-listening, I want to explain to my students that they're going to be creating their very own Dr. Seuss poem, creating new words that depict tone, meaning, and mood through the context, so they can come up with their own silly words. This encourages collaborative learning and speaking. So I'm going to match my students up in groups of 2 to 4 based on class size. And I'm going to provide students with topics for their poems, such as, you can mix it up with various Dr. Seuss ones. And in this case, let's say 1 cat, 2 cat, brown cat, orange cat, instead of 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. Each person has to contribute at least 2 lines. And then that obviously encourages a lot of speaking skills. Kids are going to get feedback from their peers. They're going to check and they're going to discuss what they've generated. So just within that one, there's going to be informal speech within their group, which is a great way to get them to start speaking. If I jump into a presentation automatically, they kind of stiffen up. Then, in the final end, they're going to be speaking. The group has to read their poem aloud to the rest of the group using proper intonation, tone, and pitch to communicate the poem's mood. Now, students have to use strategic competence in case they have trouble with certain language gaps. Sometimes they forget their lines. They can use body language to kind of enhance the understanding of the poem. So that strategic competence goes right into play there. Some of the listening principles including here are obviously modeling. And I encourage a lot of feedback from the peers. They like to listen to their peers more than they like to listen to us. But it's always important to check and discuss the results of each student's work. Okay? Now, conclusions, definitely the elements of speaking are essential when considering conversational strategies, and the fact that they need to convey a message effectively. Oops. The teacher plays a crucial role in motivating his or her students to listen and speak, and making sure that you're working around reluctant learners. But that also has to do with a lot of preparation, repetition. Make sure that you consider the size of your group, and make sure that kids know what the participation requirements are. Now, it's important to determine prior to the activity or throughout the design process what the objective behind fluency and or accuracy could be, so that they understand the expectations and they feel much more comfortable in the learning environment based on that understanding and that mutual support. Okay. It is very important, I can't emphasize this enough, to maintain a cooperative and collaborative working atmosphere, because students feel motivated, they feel much more comfortable, and they encourage each other's peer assessment in both directions. And we obviously have to correct the learner sensibly, effectively, and efficiently. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I really hope that you can put it into play someplace. There are some references here obviously I have some music in the background. I worked on some articles on planning listening skills lessons, and obviously the course content, which is Dr. Seuss. So once again, I really appreciate your attention, and I hope you enjoyed. All right, have a great day.